When Francisco disguised himself as an old beggar to test the soul of his millionaire son, he never imagined the horror that would follow. Diego cruelly humiliated him without recognizing him, breaking his heart, but saving his destiny forever. In the depths of a silent dawn, Francisco Mendoza looked at himself in the mirror of his private bathroom and felt his soul being torn apart. The tears he had shed for 3 consecutive nights had left deep furrows on his cheeks, like rivers of pain that could not dry. "My God," he whispered in a broken voice, touching the cold glass. "Where did I go wrong with my son?" At 55, Francisco had built an empire from the ashes of absolute poverty. He vividly remembered the nights when he was 8 years old. Cuddled up next to his dying mother in a cardboard room, he promised her that one day he would be rich so that no child would ever go hungry like he had. "My son," his mother had whispered with her last breath, "when you have children, teach them that money is worthless if you don't have a heart." 30 years after building his fortune, Francisco realized that he had failed miserably at that promise. His 30-year-old son, Diego, had become everything he despised, a cold, cruel man who saw the poor as human trash. "I have to know the truth," Francisco murmured, wiping away his tears with trembling hands. "I need to see who my son really is when he thinks no one is judging him." 2 hours later, the special effects specialist worked with the precision of a surgeon, transforming Francisco's distinguished face into that of an old man defeated by life. "Mr. Mendoza." The makeup artist paused his work, doubt showing in his tired eyes. "Are you completely sure about this? This disguise is so convincing that even his own mother wouldn't recognize him." Francisco closed his eyes, feeling each artificial wrinkle become a real scar on his heart. "It's exactly what I need. My son has to show me his true face." "But sir, what will you do if you discover that my son is a monster?" Francisco opened his eyes, and the makeup artist shuddered at the devastating pain they reflected. "Then at least I'll know I'm not crazy, that my suspicions were true." Over the past few months, Francisco had heard terrible rumors about Diego's cruelty. Stories of humiliated employees, beggars expelled from their favorite restaurants, waiters treated like animals. "But I always thought they were exaggerations," he muttered as the makeup artist applied the last wrinkles. "I thought people were exaggerating because they envied our money." An hour later, Francisco, dressed in clothes bought at the second-hand market, a worn sweater with holes, stained pants, broken shoes that showed his toes. Each garment was like a wound to his dignity, but he needed to experience what those who had nothing felt. "If my son has even a shred of humanity," he told himself as he practiced walking hunched over, "he will help me without knowing who I am." If not, he didn't want to finish that thought. That night at La Perla restaurant, the maitre d' of the most exclusive restaurant in town had known Francisco for 20 years. But when he saw him come in disguised as a beggar, he didn't show a glimmer of recognition. "Perfect," Francisco thought, shuffling his feet toward where his son dined every Friday. The murmurs began immediately. The elegant ladies whispered behind their fans, the businessmen frowned in disgust, and the waiters exchanged nervous glances. "How did that bum get in?" Francisco heard a woman say in a contemptuous voice. "The doorman must have been careless," replied her companion, with obvious disgust. Francisco felt each word like a slap in the face, but he continued walking toward the table where Diego was laughing loudly with his millionaire friends. His son looked impeccable in his $5,000 suit with a glass of champagne that cost more than the average worker's monthly salary. His laughter was loud, arrogant, full of the confidence that only inherited money can give. Francisco stopped a few feet from the table, gathering the courage to approach. His hands were shaking, not because of the character he was playing, but because of the genuine terror of discovering that his only son was truly a demon. "He's my boy," he whispered to himself, remembering when Diego was 5 years old and would run to hug him every time he came home from work. "Surely deep down he's still my good boy." He approached slowly with faltering steps, his back hunched as he had practiced. "Excuse me, young man." His voice came out shaky, perfectly acted, but with real pain. "Could you help an old man? I haven't had a bite to eat in 3 days." The silence that followed was deafening. Francisco could hear his own heart beating as he waited for his son's reaction. Diego looked up slowly, and Francisco saw something in his eyes that made his blood run cold. Pure contempt, genuine disgust, unfiltered cruelty. My God. Diego covered his nose theatrically, prompting immediate laughter from his friends. This old man stinks of death. Diego's friends began to laugh loudly. Some took out their phones to record. Others pointed directly at Francisco. "Look how he's shaking," shouted one of the friends. "He looks like he's going to fall over any minute. Young man, please." Francisco kept up his act, even though his son's every word was like acid in his veins. "I just need something to eat. I'm very sick." Sick. Diego rose from his chair with a smile that would have made the devil himself cry. "The only thing sick here is that you dare to interrupt our dinner with your disgusting presence." Francisco felt his legs give way. 30 years of hard work, sacrifice, sleepless nights building an empire for his son. And Diego was treating him like human trash. This old man must have dementia. Diego addressed his friends as if he were the star of a show. He thinks he can come here and beg for money from decent people. The murmurs in the restaurant intensified. Some elderly people exchanged disapproving glances, but no one dared to intervene. The restaurant manager approached nervously, hesitating between kicking out the beggar or respecting the authority of Diego, who was one of his best customers. "Please, sir," Francisco insisted, with genuine tears running down his artificially wrinkled cheeks. "Just a little food." Diego took his plate filled with the most expensive steak on the menu, and without a second's hesitation, threw it on the floor at Francisco's feet. "There's your food, you filthy beggar. Eat off the floor like the animal you are." The entire restaurant fell into a deathly silence. Even the waiter stopped, horrified by what they had just witnessed. Francisco stared at his food scattered across the marble floor, feeling his heart break into pieces. His own son, his blood, his heir. "This is better than television," shouted one of Diego's friends, recording with his phone. "Diego, you're a genius." But wait, Diego raised his hand dramatically. "The show isn't over yet." He picked up his glass of ice-cold water and, looking directly into Francisco's eyes, emptied it completely over his head. The cold water spilled down his artificially wrinkled face, mixing with the real tears he could no longer hold back. "Get out of here." Diego roared like a beast. "Before I call the police to arrest you for vagrancy." "Young man," Francisco whispered in the most broken voice of his life, "you have parents, family who love you. My parents." Diego let out a laugh that could have shattered glass. "My father is one of the richest men in the country, you pathetic old man. He would never be begging like you, because he's not a failure." Every word was like a hammer blow to Francisco's soul. His son was bragging about him while unknowingly humiliating him. "My father taught me that only the smart survive in this world." Diego leaned in close to Francisco's drenched face, his breath smelling of expensive champagne. "And you disgusting old man, are clearly not smart." His father, Francisco, could barely articulate the words. What would he think if he saw him humiliating an old man? What would he think? Diego smiled with a cruelty that would have made demons tremble. "He would think that I raised a perfect son because he taught me that compassion is for the weak." The lie was so painful that Francisco felt like he was suffocating. He had never taught Diego that. Never. Moreover, Diego continued with pure venom. "If my own father were begging like you, I would kick him out just the same. Losers don't deserve respect no matter who they are." Those words completely shattered Francisco's heart. His son had just confirmed that he wouldn't help him, even if he were his own father. "Now get out." Diego motioned to the manager, who reluctantly approached before you ruin the appetite of decent customers. Francisco began to stagger away, not because of the performance, but because he genuinely felt like he was going to collapse. When he reached the door, he turned one last time to look at his son. Diego was clinking glasses with his friends, laughing at what he had just done. As if humiliating a desperate old man was the best entertainment of his life for teaching beggars manners, Diego raised his glass with diabolical pride. 15 minutes later, Francisco reached his car with trembling legs and a completely broken soul. He slumped into the driver's seat and cried as he hadn't cried since his mother's death. 30 years of sacrifice, 30 years of believing he was raising a good man, 30 years of building a legacy for someone who turned out to be a monster. My mother was right, he sobbed as he removed his makeup with trembling hands. Heartless money creates demons. But as the tears ran down his cheeks, something changed in Francisco's eyes. A cold, definitive determination took hold of him. Diego had shown his true colors. He had failed the most important test of his life, and now Francisco knew exactly what he had to do. The consequences for Diego were going to be more devastating than his son could ever imagine. Over the course of 7 hellish days, Francisco Mendoza had not been able to close his eyes for even a second since that night. Every time he tried to sleep, he saw Diego's face laughing as he poured ice-cold water over his head. Every time he tried to eat, his stomach churned at the memory of his own food scattered on the floor like dog waste. His office, once a sanctuary of success and power, had become a silent tomb. Employees passed by in the hallway whispering, exchanging worried glances about their boss's condition. "Mr. Mendoza hasn't left his office in a week, Carmen," his 60-year-old assistant whispered to another employee. "He only asks for black coffee and doesn't answer the phone." Inside that office, Francisco had become a shadow of his former self. His $15,000 suit looked wrinkled as if he had slept in it for days. His hair, always impeccably styled, hung unkempt over his forehead. His eyes, once filled with business determination, now reflected utter emptiness. 30 years, he muttered hoarsely, looking at the photographs on his desk, where Diego appeared smiling from age 5 to college. 30 years raising a demon and believing he was my angel. That morning, Carmen knocked softly on the door before entering, her uncertain footsteps revealing the tension that everyone in the building was feeling. "Mr. Mendoza?" Her voice trembled slightly. "The board of directors is asking for you. They've canceled 3 important meetings this week." Francisco looked up slowly, and Carmen recoiled involuntarily at the devastating pain in his eyes. "Carmen," his voice came out as a torn whisper. "Do you have children?" "Yes, sir. 3 children and 5 grandchildren." "Do you love them?" Carmen hesitated, confused by the strange question. "With all my heart, sir. They are my life. And if you discovered that one of them enjoyed making helpless elderly people suffer, what would you do?" The older woman swallowed hard, seeing something terrifying in her boss's gaze. "Sir, I don't understand. Answer me." Francisco suddenly roared, slamming his fist on the desk with such force that Carmen jumped back. "I would try to teach him, to correct him, to show him the right path." Francisco let out a bitter laugh that chilled the blood. "Teach him at 30 years old, Carmen. Dear Carmen, there are hearts that are born rotten and there is no possible salvation for them." Carmen stood motionless by the door, not knowing whether to flee or stay. "Do you know what I discovered?" Francisco rose slowly like a wounded predator. "That my son, the heir to everything I built with blood and tears, is capable of humiliating an old man for fun. And worst of all, he was proud of it. Mr. Mendoza, maybe if you talk to him." "Ah, talk." Francisco walked to the panoramic window, looking out over the city he had conquered. "Carmen, cancel all my meetings. Today I'm going to do something I should have done the day my son was born." "What are you going to do?" Francisco turned with a smile that could have frozen the fires of hell. "I'm going to teach him what it feels like to be in the shoes of the people he despises." That afternoon, Diego Mendoza was in his luxury apartment, sprawled on his Italian leather sofa, which cost more than a new car, playing video games while drinking $1,000 a bottle whiskey. An entertainment program was playing on the 80-inch television, but he was more focused on his game. His phone rang. The name Dad appeared on the screen. "What do you want, old man?" he answered without looking up from the screen, with his usual carefree tone. "Diego, I need to see you immediately. Come to the office, I'm busy. It can't wait until tomorrow. I'm in the middle of a game." Francisco closed his eyes, feeling rage build up in his chest like hot lava. After discovering his son's true nature, Diego still dared to treat him with such contempt. "Diego, I'm not asking you for a favor. I'm giving you an order. Come right now or the consequences will be worse than your little brain can imagine." Something in his father's icy tone made Diego pause the game for the first time. "Are you okay? You sound different." I'll be perfect when you have the courage to look me in the eye. You have exactly 1 hour. The line went dead, leaving Diego with a strange feeling of unease in his stomach. An hour later, Diego walked into his father's office with his usual arrogance, but stopped short when he saw Francisco's deplorable state. His father, always so neat and elegant, looked as if he had aged 10 years in a week. My God, Dad, what happened to you? You look terrible. Francisco stared at him, studying every gesture, every expression on his face. Sit down, Diego. It's time we had the most important conversation of our lives. What are you talking about? Diego sat down, but something in the atmosphere made him nervous. To discover who you really are. I don't understand. Francisco slowly opened his desk drawer and took out a thick manila envelope. Diego, do you remember last Friday night? La Perla restaurant. The Pearl. Sure, we had dinner there like we do every Friday. Why? Do you remember a beggar showing up asking for food? Diego's face lit up with a cruel smile. Oh yes, the disgusting old man who interrupted our dinner. I taught him a lesson he'll never forget. My friends couldn't stop congratulating me on how I put him in his place. Every word was like a nail being hammered into the coffin. Tell me exactly, step by step, what you did to that old man. Why do you want to know those details? Diego leaned back in his chair with diabolical pride. I threw his food on the floor like the dog he was. I poured ice-cold water on him and kicked him out of the restaurant like the human trash he was. Francisco felt his insides tear apart as he listened to his own son describe his humiliation with such pleasure. And how did you feel doing it? I felt incredible. Diego laughed with a malice that made Francisco's hair stand on end. That pathetic old man needed to be taught not to bother important people. Besides, it was fun to see him tremble with fear. Fun. Super fun. I told my friends that if my own father were begging like that loser, I would do exactly the same thing. Losers don't deserve compassion. Those words were the final blow. Francisco opened the manila envelope with hands trembling with contained rage. Diego, I want you to see something that will change your life forever. The photographs fell onto the desk like bombs. They were high-definition images of Diego in the restaurant, humiliating the old man. But there was something different. The photos had been taken from angles that clearly showed the beggar's face without makeup. Diego picked up the first photograph with curiosity, but when he processed what he was seeing, his blood ran cold. The old man's face was his father's. No, no, it can't be, Diego whispered in a broken voice, taking photo after photo, seeing the irrefutable evidence that he had humiliated his own father. Yes, Diego, that disgusting old man you treated worse than an animal was me. The photographs fell from his trembling hands as the devastating reality hit him like a tsunami. Dad, I didn't know it was you. Exactly. Francisco rose in a rage, his voice making the window panes rattle. You didn't know it was me. So you showed your true colors. You proved that you enjoy torturing defenseless old people. But, Dad, if you had known, you would have treated me differently. Francisco approached with threatening steps. Diego, you just confirmed that you only respect people for their money, not for their humanity. Diego began to cry uncontrollably, tears streaming down his cheeks like waterfalls. Dad, forgive me, I'm not really like that. You're not like that. Francisco picked up one of the photographs that clearly showed Diego laughing as he poured water on his father. Look at this picture. Look at the look of pleasure on your face as you torture an old man. Diego looked at the photo and felt nauseous. His own expression of cruelty and amusement was undeniable. I can change, Dad. Can I be a better person at 30? Francisco shook his head with infinite sadness. Diego, the soul is formed in childhood. What you did that night was not a mistake. It was your true self. Francisco returned to his desk and took out several legal documents. What are those papers? Diego asked with growing terror. Your social and economic death sentence. Diego's world collapsed. What do you mean? From this moment on, you are officially disinherited. You will not receive a penny of my $200 million fortune. No, Diego jumped up, his eyes wide. You can't do that to me. Not only can I, it's already done. I've also canceled all your bank accounts, all your credit cards, your apartment lease, and your car. Dad, you're killing me. Diego collapsed to his knees, sobbing like a lost child. I'm not killing you, Diego. I'm giving you the chance to be reborn as a decent human being. What does that mean? It means you're going to live exactly like that old man you humiliated, with no money, no home, nothing. For how long? Diego asked between desperate sobs. Forever. Forever no, Diego cried out with soul-wrenching despair. Francisco paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Unless, unless what? Diego clung to that hope like a shipwrecked man to a plank. Unless you find that old man you humiliated and ask him for forgiveness on your knees. Would you really forgive me if I did that? If that old man genuinely forgives you, I will consider giving you a second chance. Diego wiped away his tears, glimpsing hope. Where do I find him? You have to find him yourself, without help, without money, without contacts, like the beggar you are now. Reality hit Diego like a hammer blow. Finding an unknown beggar in a city of 10 million people without resources was practically impossible. Francisco headed for the door. Security will escort you out of the building. You are forbidden from entering any of my properties. Dad, don't abandon me. Diego ran after him with desperate tears. Francisco stopped without turning around. You abandoned me first, Diego. You abandoned me the night you decided that torturing old people was entertainment. I swear I'll change. Don't swear to me. Swear to that old man when you find him. Francisco left, leaving Diego completely destroyed, without money, without a home, without a future. For the first time in his privileged life, Diego Mendoza was about to learn the true meaning of despair. As the first week on the street bed, Diego Mendoza woke up in the cold, damp alley where he had spent his seventh consecutive night with a sore body and a completely shattered soul. His designer clothes, once impeccable, now looked dirty and torn. His hair, always perfectly styled with expensive products, hung greasily over his sweaty forehead. My God, he muttered hoarsely, feeling his stomach contract with hunger. This has to be a nightmare. But it wasn't a nightmare, it was his new reality. In the early days, he had tried to reach out to his millionaire friends, knocking desperately on the doors of their mansions. But the doormen had thrown him out like a common vagrant. His former party companions wouldn't even answer his calls from payphones. Diego had muttered Roberto, one of his best friends, when he finally managed to reach him. Are you crazy? My father forbade me to talk to you. He says your dad is furious and that anyone who gets involved will suffer the consequences. The line had gone dead, leaving Diego with the devastating realization that he was completely alone. That morning, Diego walked through the elegant streets of the city, seeing with new eyes a world he had previously ignored completely. On every corner there were people like him, beggars, abandoned elderly people, mothers with children begging for coins. Excuse me, young man. An elderly woman of about 70 approached him wearing patched but clean clothes. Could you help me with some coins to buy medicine? Diego stared at her, suddenly remembering the night at the restaurant. This woman reminded him of the beggar he had humiliated, who had turned out to be his own father. No, I don't have anything, he whispered, feeling tears welling up in his eyes. I understand, my son. The old woman smiled at him with a kindness that broke his heart. God bless you anyway. As the woman walked away, Diego slumped against a wall, crying inconsolably. How could I have been so cruel? How could I have enjoyed humiliating people like her? By noon, his hunger had become unbearable. Diego hadn't eaten anything solid in 2 days, surviving on water from public fountains. His legs trembled with weakness as he timidly approached a family restaurant. Excuse me, he said to the waiter, a middle-aged man with a stained apron. Could you give me something to eat? I'm very hungry. The waiter looked him up and down, noticing his expensive but dirty clothes. Aren't you Diego Mendoza, the millionaire's son? Diego's heart raced. He knows me. Of course I know you. I worked at La Perla until last week. The waiter's eyes hardened with contempt. I saw you humiliate that poor old man. It was the cruelest thing I've ever seen. Diego felt the ground open up beneath his feet. Sir, I can explain. Explain. The waiter raised his voice, attracting the attention of other customers. How do you explain throwing food at an old man and pouring water on yourself while laughing? Murmurs began to spread through the restaurant. Diners turned to look, some taking out their phones. Please, Diego pleaded with tears in his eyes. I just need something to eat. You know what? The waiter smiled bitterly. I'm going to treat you exactly the same way you treated that poor old man. He took a plate of cold food from the kitchen and threw it on the floor in front of Diego's feet. There's your food. Eat off the floor like you made him do. The entire restaurant erupted in murmurs of approval. Some customers applauded. Others recorded it on their phones. Way to go, shouted an elderly woman. Let's see how he likes the same treatment. Diego stood there, staring at the food scattered on the floor, feeling firsthand the devastating humiliation he had inflicted on his father. Get out of here, roared the waiter, just as Diego had done a week earlier. Diego ran out of the restaurant, sobbing like a lost child over the past 2 weeks. The search for the old man he had humiliated had become a desperate obsession. Diego went to every shelter, every church, every refuge in the city, describing the man over and over again. An old man of about 70, hunched over wearing threadbare clothes, asked the coordinator of a shelter, Son, hundreds of people like that pass through here every week, but you have to remember him. Diego insisted with growing desperation. He was very thin, with a trembling voice. You're describing half of our guests. The man shook his head. I'm sorry, but I can't help you. One night in the Central Park, Diego had taken refuge under a bench, shivering with cold, when a group of other homeless people approached him. They were men and women of different ages, all marked by the harshness of the street. Hey, said a man in his 50s with a gray beard and tired eyes. You're new to this, Diego. He nodded, too weak to speak. I can tell. You still have that look of someone who doesn't understand how they got here. A middle-aged woman approached. What's your name, my son? Diego whispered in a broken voice. I'm Carmen. The woman offered him a worn blanket. And this is Roberto. We've been on the streets for 5 years. 5 years. Diego looked at them in horror. How? How is that possible? Roberto let out a bitter laugh. Life can take everything away from you in a second, kid. I was an accountant. I had a family, my own house. One day my company went bankrupt. I got sick. I lost everything. My family abandoned me. I was a teacher, Carmen added with infinite sadness. But I got cancer. The treatments cost me everything I had. When I recovered, I had nothing and no one left. Diego listened with a broken heart, understanding for the first time that every homeless person had a story, a tragedy, a life that had been taken away. And you have never, ever asked rich people for help. Help! Roberto laughed bitterly. Son, most rich people see us as trash. They kick us out. They humiliate us. They treat us worse than animals. I remember once, Carmen whispered through her tears, I asked a young millionaire for help in a fancy restaurant. He threw food on the floor and poured water on me while his friends laughed. Diego was paralyzed. What? What young man? I don't know his name, but he was cruel as a demon, tall, elegant, with eyes as cold as ice. Tears began to run down Diego's cheeks. Carmen, that person was me. The silence that followed was deafening. Roberto and Carmen looked at him with expressions of shock and horror. You, Carmen, instinctively backed away. You were the one who humiliated me that night. Yes, Diego, I was out of control, and now I understand the hell I put you through. Roberto stood up with fury in his eyes. Everyone come here. This bastard is one of those cruel millionaires. Minutes later, a circle of homeless people surrounded Diego, all with expressions of hatred and thirst for revenge. Men and women who had suffered similar humiliations for years. So you're one of those monsters who enjoys our suffering, spat an old man with scars on his face. Let's give him what he deserves, shouted another woman. Let's see how he likes the treatment he gives us. No, please. Diego cowered on the ground in terror. I've changed now. I'm sorry for the pain I caused you. You changed? After how many people you humiliated? After how many hearts you broke? Roberto approached with eyes full of rage. I don't know, Diego cried through his tears, but now I feel every blow I gave them, every humiliation I put them through. Carmen approached slowly, studying Diego's shattered face. You know what, guys? We're not going to hurt him. Why not? Roberto asked in surprise. Because he's already receiving the worst punishment possible. He's living through the same thing he put us through. Carmen knelt in front of Diego. Boy, you're going to suffer every day you spend on the street. You're going to feel every look of contempt, every door that's closed on you, every humiliation we've suffered for years. I know, Diego whispered in a broken voice, and I deserve it. Do you know what the worst part is? Carmen continued with tears in her eyes, that when you finally understand our pain, when you truly change your heart, it will be too late, because the damage you did can never be undone. Those words pierced Diego's soul like poisoned daggers. I may never be able to redeem myself, Roberto whispered, but it will cost you everything you are and everything you thought you were worth. The circle slowly dispersed, leaving Diego completely alone under the cold stars, with the devastating realization that his true punishment had only just begun. Over the course of a month, Diego had lost almost 20 kgs. His cheekbones protruded sharply, his eyes had sunk, and his hands trembled constantly from malnutrition. He continued to search desperately for the old man he had humiliated, but with each passing day, his hope faded a little more. He has to be somewhere, he repeated to himself as he roamed the poorest neighborhoods. There has to be a way to ask for his forgiveness. But in his heart, he was beginning to understand a terrible truth. Perhaps the old man he was looking for had never really existed. Perhaps his father had orchestrated everything from the beginning, and perhaps his search was as impossible as his redemption. After 3 months in hell, Diego Mendoza no longer looked like the man he had been. His body had lost 30 kilos. His face was gaunt and covered with an unkempt beard, and his eyes reflected such deep pain that anyone who saw them would feel a twinge in their heart. He had scoured every corner of the city looking for the mysterious old man, every shelter, every church, every park, every corner where the homeless gathered. But it was like looking for a drop of water in the ocean. He has to be somewhere, he muttered, as he shuffled through the icy streets in broken shoes that no longer protected his sore feet. He has to exist. That morning at the Central Market, Diego timidly approached a woman selling fruit at a small stall. His hands were shaking, not only from the cold, but also from the shame of having to beg again. "Excuse me, ma'am." His voice came out as little more than a hoarse whisper. "Could you give me a piece of fruit? I haven't eaten anything in 2 days." The woman looked him up and down, noticing his deplorable condition. Her eyes softened with compassion. "Oh, my dear boy, you look terrible," she murmured as she selected an apple. "Here, eat it slowly so it doesn't hurt you." Diego took the fruit with trembling hands, feeling tears well up in his eyes. "Thank you, ma'am. God bless you." "Do you have family, boy?" The woman asked with genuine concern. "I had a father," Diego whispered in a broken voice, "but I lost him because of my own cruelty." The vendor frowned, intrigued by the strange response. "You know what?" the woman continued. "My brother runs a soup kitchen nearby. Go to St. Michael's Church this afternoon. They give out hot meals and a place to sleep." Diego felt a ray of hope. St. Michael's Church. "Yes, my son. Ask for Father Antonio. Tell him Rosa sent you." That afternoon at St. Michael's Church, Diego nervously approached the church. It was a modest but welcoming building with bells ringing softly in the wind. Outside, there was a line of people waiting. Elderly people, mothers with children, men broken by life. When he saw the line, Diego froze. For months, he had avoided places where there were many homeless people together for fear of encountering more victims of his past cruelty. "Are you here for food, son?" asked an elderly man at the end of the line. Diego nodded silently. "Stand behind me. Father Antonio is a saint. He never refuses to help anyone." Minutes later, when his turn came, Diego found himself in front of a priest in his 60s with gray hair and eyes full of infinite kindness. "Welcome, son." Father Antonio smiled at him with genuine warmth. "It's your first time here." "Yes, Father. Rosa from the market told me to come." "Rosa is a blessing." The priest began to serve him a steaming bowl of soup and bread. "What is your name?" Diego replied, avoiding eye contact. "Diego, I can see in your eyes that you are carrying a great deal of pain. Would you like to talk about it?" Diego felt his voice break. "Father, I have done terrible things, things that do not deserve forgiveness." Father Antonio paused, studying the young man's broken face. "Son, there is no sin so great that God cannot forgive if your repentance is genuine. Even if you have humiliated defenseless elderly people, Even if you have enjoyed seeing the weakest suffer, a heavy silence spread between them. Father Antonio exchanged a meaningful glance with a nun who was nearby. Come with me after you finish eating. The priest whispered, there is someone you may want to meet. An hour later, Father Antonio led Diego down a quiet hallway to a small room at the back of the church. Diego could hear his own heart beating as they walked. Diego, the priest paused before opening the door. What you are about to see will change you forever. What will change? Your understanding of what forgiveness really means. Father Antonio slowly opened the door. Inside, sitting in a wheelchair by a window, was an elderly man of about 70. His back was hunched, his hair completely gray, and his hands trembled slightly. Diego recognized him immediately. It was the beggar from the restaurant. It can't be. Diego backed away, bumping into the wall. You're old, he said. The man turned slowly, and when his eyes met Diego's, a strange smile appeared on his wrinkled face. Hello, Diego. His voice was weak but clear. I've been waiting for you for a long time. Diego collapsed to his knees, crying uncontrollably. Forgive me, please forgive me. I've suffered so much looking for you. I know, son. I know. I was a monster to you. I humiliated you in the cruelest way. I don't deserve your forgiveness. The old man extended his trembling hand toward Diego. Come here, boy. Diego crawled closer, his face drenched in tears. Why? Why are you here? Because after that night in the restaurant, my heart was so broken that I ended up seriously ill. Father Antonio has been taking care of me ever since. My God, Diego, he cried out in heartbreaking anguish. I made him sick. I brought him here. Diego, the old man took his hands with infinite gentleness. Do you know why I forgive you? You forgive me? Diego looked up with desperate hope. I forgive you because I see in your eyes the same pain I felt that night. I see that you truly understand what you did to me. Diego sobbed so hard that his whole body convulsed. I'll do anything to make up for the damage. Anything. There is only one thing I want from you. What? Anything. The old man smiled weakly. I want you to promise me that you will never again humiliate a defenseless person. I promise. I swear on my mother's life. And I want you to dedicate your life to helping those who suffer as I suffered. I will. I will dedicate every day of my life to helping others. Father Antonio watched the scene with tears in his eyes. He had witnessed many reconciliations, but few as profound and genuine as this one. Diego, the old man, continued in an increasingly weak voice. There is something else you need to know. What is it? My real name is Esteban Herrera, and I have a very important message for you. What message? Esteban looked at Father Antonio, who nodded with understanding. The message is from your father. Diego froze. My father? You know my father? He hired me to do this. Diego's world collapsed. What? What does that mean? It means your father orchestrated everything from the beginning. He paid me to go to the restaurant that night and provoke your reaction. Diego felt as if his heart had been ripped out. It was all an act. No, son. My pain was real. Your cruelty was real. My illness from the humiliation was real. The only thing that was planned was the initial situation. Why? Diego whispered in a broken voice. Why would my father do such a thing? Because he loves you more than you can imagine, and because it was the only way to save you, to turn you into a monster forever. Esteban coughed weakly before continuing. Your father told me, my son has to hit rock bottom in order to be reborn as a decent man. Where is he now? He's here. Father Antonio spoke softly. He has been coming every day for 3 months, disguised as one of our volunteers, watching you from afar. Diego jumped up like lightning. Is he here now? Yes. A familiar voice sounded from the doorway. Diego turned and saw his father standing in the doorway with tears streaming down his cheeks and his arms outstretched. Dad, Diego whispered, running toward him like a lost child. They embraced with an intensity that shook the walls, crying together all the tears they had held back for months. Forgive me, Dad. Forgive me for being a monster. You're not a monster anymore, son, Francisco whispered into his hair. Now you are the man I always knew you could be. Do you forgive me? I forgave you the moment I saw your first genuine tears. Father and son remained in each other's arms while Esteban smiled from his wheelchair and Father Antonio wiped away tears of joy. "What will happen now?" Diego asked in a trembling voice. "Now," Francisco smiled with infinite love. "We are going to dedicate our lives to helping people like Esteban together. Together. Together, son, as father and son who finally found each other." 6 months after the reconciliation, Francisco and Diego Mendoza walked together through the streets that had once been the son's territory of survival, but had now become his field of redemption. Both were dressed in simple, unadorned clothes, carrying bags full of hot food and medicine to distribute to the homeless. Diego had insisted on maintaining his humble appearance. His hair was still simple, his beard well-groomed but unpretentious, and his eyes reflected a depth he had not had before hitting rock bottom. "Dad." Diego stopped in front of an alley where an old man was huddled under wet cardboard. "I can approach him alone." Francisco looked at his son with eyes full of pride and nodded silently. In recent months, he had witnessed the most beautiful transformation he had ever seen in his life. Diego slowly approached the old man with careful steps so as not to scare him. "Excuse me, sir." His voice was soft, full of genuine respect. "Would you like some hot soup?" The man looked up suspiciously. It was common for rich young people to approach him just to mock him. "Aren't you going to ask me to leave?" the old man asked in a harsh voice. "No, sir. I just want to offer you something to eat." Diego knelt on the damp ground at the same height as the old man and handed him a steaming thermos. "Why are you doing this?" the man asked as he accepted the food with trembling hands. "Because I was once cruel to someone like you," Diego replied with tears in his eyes. "And now I understand that every person deserves dignity and respect, regardless of their situation." The old man studied Diego's face, seeing the genuine sincerity in his eyes. "What's your name, young man?" "My name is Diego, sir. And you?" "I'm Aurelio. I've been on the street for 4 years. Would you like to tell me your story, Don Aurelio?" Aurelio was surprised. No one had called him Don in years. He was a carpenter. He began with a broken voice. "I had my own little workshop, but I got sick with heart disease. The medical bills took everything I had. My family was ashamed of my condition." Diego's heart broke as he listened to the story, remembering how he himself had embarrassed his father. "Don Aurelio." Diego took the old man's wrinkled hands. "Would you like a place to sleep tonight? My father and I have opened a shelter. It's not luxurious, but it has clean beds, hot food, and, above all, dignity." Aurelio began to cry silently. "Really, really. And if you want, we could help you set up a small carpentry workshop so you can work again." That night at the second home shelter, the shelter that Francisco and Diego had established was unlike any other in the city. It not only provided shelter and food, but treated each person with the dignity of a respected guest. The walls were painted in warm colors. There were plants in every corner, and soft music played in the background. But the most important thing was the atmosphere. There was no air of condescending charity, but of mutual respect. Don Aurelio, Diego led him to a small but cozy room. "This will be your room while you are with us." The old man touched the bed with trembling hands as if he couldn't believe it was real. "I haven't slept in a bed in 4 years, he whispered in a broken voice. "Well, tonight you're going to sleep like a king." Diego smiled with tears in his eyes. The next morning, Diego woke up early and found his father in the kitchen, preparing breakfast for the 30 guests who now lived in the shelter. "Good morning, Dad. Good morning, son. How did you sleep?" "Better than ever." Diego began to help with the preparations. "Do you know what Don Aurelio said to me last night?" "What did he say?" "He said it was the first time in years that someone saw him as a person, not a problem." Francisco paused, looking at his son with a mixture of pride and emotion. "Diego, do you realize what you've accomplished?" "What have I accomplished?" "You've transformed your pain into compassion. You've turned your shame into purpose." Diego approached his father and hugged him tightly. "Dad, this is all thanks to you. Thank you for not abandoning me when I deserved to be abandoned. Son, I would never have abandoned you, but I had to find a way to save you from yourself." That afternoon, an elegant entourage stopped in front of the shelter. It was the mayor of the city, accompanied by reporters and television cameras. The news of Diego Mendoza's transformation had reached the highest levels of government. Whispers began among the shelter's guests. Some hid, fearful of public attention, while others watched from the windows with nervous curiosity. Mr. Mendoza, the mayor approached with a smile. We have come to officially recognize your incredible social work. Francisco and Diego exchanged uncomfortable glances. Mr. Mayor, Francisco replied diplomatically, we appreciate your recognition, but we don't do this for publicity. But the people should know, insisted the mayor, gesturing toward the cameras. Your son's transformation is an example for the whole city. Diego stepped forward with a serious expression. Mr. Mayor, with all due respect, my transformation is not a success story for the media. It's a story of pain, shame, and redemption that I'm still living. The reporters approached with microphones, but Diego raised his hand. If you want to do a story, he continued in a firm voice, do it about these people who have lost everything and continue to fight for their dignity every day. He walked over to Don Aurelio, who was watching nervously from the doorway. This is the real story. Diego put his arm around the old man's shoulders. Don Aurelio was a respected carpenter who lost everything to illness. Now he is rebuilding his life with more courage than I ever had. That night, after the media left, Don Aurelio approached Diego in the shelter's garden, where the young man was sitting under the stars, deep in thought. Diego, the old man, sat down next to him. Can I ask you something? Of course, Don Aurelio. Why did you reject all that publicity? It could have benefited you. Diego smiled sadly because a year ago I would have taken advantage of that opportunity to feed my ego. I would have used his suffering to make myself look good. And now I understand that my job here is not to redeem my image, it is to redeem my soul. Don Aurelio nodded wisely. Do you know what your father said to me yesterday? What did he say? He said he had his son back, but he had gained something even more valuable. What had he gained? A good man. Diego felt his eyes fill with tears. Don Aurelio, do you think that one day I will be able to forgive myself completely? The old man placed his wrinkled hand on Diego's shoulder. Young man, true forgiveness does not come when you stop feeling guilty. It comes when you turn that guilt into a force that helps others. And I believe you are achieving that, son. Don Aurelio smiled with tears in his eyes. Every person who sleeps with dignity tonight, thanks to you, is proof that you have already succeeded. As another month passed, the shelter had grown, not only in size but in purpose. It now had a carpentry workshop run by Don Aurelio, a community kitchen where guests could learn culinary skills, and a small garden where they grew their own vegetables. But the most beautiful thing was that many of those who had arrived as guests now stayed on as volunteers, helping others in their own recovery process. Dad, Diego said to Francisco as they watched Don Aurelio teaching carpentry to other refugees, I think I finally understand what true happiness means. What does that mean, son? It means waking up every morning knowing that you're going to make someone's life a little bit better. It means going to sleep every night without being ashamed of who you are. Francisco hugged his son with tears of pure pride. Your mother would be so proud of you. My mother. She always told me that money only had value if it was used to heal broken hearts. Diego looked up at the starry sky. Mom, I hope you can see me now. I hope you can see that I finally became the son you deserved. And in the silence of the night, father and son felt a warm presence enveloping them, as if love could transcend even death, to bless those who had learned to truly love. Over the course of 2 years, since that night that changed the destiny of 2 souls, the second home shelter had been transformed into something that surpassed Francisco and Diego's wildest dreams. What had begun as a simple emergency shelter was now a thriving community of more than 300 souls who had found not only a roof over their heads, but the opportunity to be reborn with absolute dignity. Diego walked through the corridors he knew like the lines of his own hand, greeting each person by name, remembering their stories of pain, but celebrating their small daily triumphs. His transformation had been so profound that even his face had changed. Where once cold, icy eyes had dwelled, now shone a light that only comes from genuine forgiveness of oneself. Good morning, Doña Carmen. He approached with reverence a 73-year-old woman who had arrived at the shelter 8 months earlier after being brutally evicted from the house where she had lived for 40 years. Good morning, my dear grandson. The old woman smiled at him as she tended the plants in the community garden. You've come to see how my tomatoes of hope are doing, Doña Carmen. How did your heart wake up today? The woman stood up straight with the pride of someone who has regained her place in the world. My heart woke up feeling useful, Diego. For the first time in 3 years of loneliness, my heart feels useful for something beautiful. Diego felt that familiar twinge in his chest, that devastating mixture of pain for what these souls had suffered and pure joy at seeing them blossom like roses after the cruelest winter. That morning in the shelter's office that smelled of fresh coffee, Francisco was immersed in the account books when Diego entered with an expression that his father recognized immediately. It was the same face he used to make as a child when he had something terribly important to say. "Dad," Diego's voice trembled slightly, "we have a problem that could destroy everything we built." Francisco looked up slowly, feeling his stomach contract with pure anxiety. "Tell me, what's going on, son?" "The Rodriguezes want to buy the land where the shelter is located." Francisco felt as if an icy dagger had been plunged directly into his heart. The Rodriguezes, that family of unscrupulous builders, the very same ones. They want to build a luxury shopping center. Exactly. They're offering 10 times the actual value of the land, but if we refuse, they'll find ways to destroy us. Francisco finished the sentence, knowing full well the ruthless methods of that family. Diego nodded, tears threatening to spill. They have political connections that reach all the way to the mayor himself. They can shut down the shelter using any municipal regulation. How long have they given us? 30 days, Diego whispered, as if uttering those words would make them come true more quickly. Francisco slumped in his chair, feeling the devastating weight of 300 lives that depended on this place. "Diego, do you understand what this means for our people? It means that Doña Carmen would be back sleeping on the streets, that Don Aurelio would lose his workshop where he has found his purpose, that mothers with small children would have to beg for food again." Diego's voice broke completely. "It means that all these families who have rebuilt their lives from the ashes would return to the hell we pulled them out of." That afternoon in the main hall, which was filled with tension you could cut with a knife, the entire shelter had gathered for the most important emergency meeting of their lives. The air was so thick with anxiety that it was difficult to breathe. Nervous murmurs spread like waves throughout the room as families instinctively hugged each other, their hearts sensing the storm that was coming. The elderly wiped away tears before they fell. Parents squeezed their young children's hands, and everyone looked at Francisco and Diego with that mixture of desperate hope and terror that only those who have already lost everything once know. "My dear family," Francisco began, his voice struggling not to break, "because that is exactly what we are. I have to tell you the most difficult news I have ever given in my life." The silence became so absolute that you could hear the rapid beating of 300 terrified hearts. "The Rodriguez family wants this land to build a luxury shopping center. They have given us exactly 30 days to sell voluntarily, or they will find legal ways to force us out." A collective gasp swept through the room like a devastating wave. Some women began to sob silently. The men clenched their fists in helplessness, and the elderly embraced each other like shipwrecked sailors, clinging to the last pieces of the sinking ship. "What are we going to do, Don Francisco?" asked Maria Elena, a 26-year-old single mother who had arrived with her 2 children after fleeing an abusive husband. "Where are we going to go now?" whispered Don Aurelio, tears running down his wrinkled cheeks. Francisco raised his hands, desperately trying to calm the sea of pain. "Listen to me, please. Diego and I are going to fight with every fiber of our being. We will not allow them to destroy our home without putting up the fight of our lives." That night in Francisco's room, under the flickering light of an old lamp, father and son had not been able to close their eyes for even a second. They had spent 6 hours desperately searching for solutions, but everything seemed like a dead end. "Diego," Francisco broke the silence that weighed like a slab on their hearts. "There's something I've never told you about how all this started." "What is it, Dad?" "When I began planning your lesson on compassion, I spent months researching the lives of homeless people in this city." Francisco got up and walked to the window, looking out at the garden where Don Aurelio had planted flowers with such love. "I discovered a truth that broke my heart. Most shelters aren't closed due to lack of funds. They're closed because of real estate greed. The land becomes too valuable to waste on the poor. Diego felt his blood run cold. Did you know something like this could happen to us? I feared it every night, but I thought we would have time to build something solid. What are we really going to do? Francisco turned to his son with an expression Diego had never seen before. It was pure determination mixed with beautiful madness. We're going to use every penny of my personal fortune to buy the largest piece of land we can find. And we're going to build the first completely self-sufficient city for people who have lost everything. Diego was speechless. Dad, that would cost your entire fortune? All 200 million. Diego Francisco took his son's hands. What good is it to me to have 200 million in bank accounts if I can't protect the 300 people I love more than my own life? Are you absolutely sure? Francisco smiled with a peace that radiated from the depths of his being. I have never been more sure of anything in my 57 years of life. The next morning, as the sun rose over a world that was about to change, the news spread throughout the shelter like a fire of hope. Francisco and Diego had decided to literally sacrifice the entire family fortune to create a completely self-sufficient community, where homeless people would have decent jobs, schools for their children, and a genuine opportunity to completely rebuild their lives. It's true. Doña Carmen approached Diego with tears like diamonds. It's true that they are going to build an entire city just for us. It's more than true, Doña Carmen. It's a promise sealed with blood from the heart. A community where you will have your own garden, where Don Aurelio will have the best equipped workshop in the state, where every family will have their own house with a garden. The old woman collapsed into Diego's arms, sobbing with such pure happiness that it made everyone nearby cry. But that will cost a fortune, exclaimed Roberto Martinez, an engineer who had lost everything. Roberto Francisco approached with that smile he had learned since discovering the true meaning of wealth. Do you know the difference between having money and having true wealth? No, Mr. Francisco. Having money is accumulating cold numbers in bank accounts. Having true wealth is waking up every morning surrounded by people who sincerely love you and whom you can make happy. 4 months later, in a ceremony that changed history, the new land was a marvel. 100 hectares where Francisco had invested every last penny to build not only houses, but a complete infrastructure with schools, workshops, a medical clinic, a community center, and even a church built with the hands of the future inhabitants. The community was called Nueva Esperanza, New Hope, and had been officially declared the first self-sufficient community for vulnerable people on the entire continent. Thousands of people had come for the historic inauguration. Politicians, business people, international media, but above all, hundreds of families who had been helped by the original shelter. Ladies and gentlemen, Francisco spoke from the podium built with wood that Don Aurelio had carved. 2.5 years ago, my son was a completely different person. The crowd of 5,000 people fell into reverential silence. Diego was cruel to the bone, selfish to the core, and had lost all connection to his humanity. He was rich in money, but miserable in soul. Diego held his head high with the dignity of one who has learned that the shame of the past can be turned into wisdom. I was a father who had accumulated $200 million, but I had lost the only treasure that mattered, my son's noble soul. So I made the most terrifying decision to risk everything to save him. I hired an actor named Esteban Herrera to provoke a genuine reaction in Diego. What I never expected was to discover that my son was capable of humiliating an elderly man so cruelly that even I felt sick. Francisco let the tears flow freely. That night I saw the son I had raised die, but I also saw the possibility of a dignified man being reborn. Dad, Diego took the microphone with trembling hands. Will you allow me to speak? My name is Diego Mendoza. His voice rang out clearly, and I am a man who descended into the darkest depths of the human soul. For 30 years, I lived believing that my money gave me the right to treat others like trash. His voice broke, but he found strength. My father taught me that true wealth does not lie in what you accumulate, but in what you give, without expecting anything in return. Diego extended his arms toward the community. This community is not our gift to those in need. It is the gift they have given us. Every person here teaches us about the resilience of the human spirit and the heart's capacity to heal. Don Aurelio approached the podium with dignity. I can say a few words. I met Diego when he was a soulless monster. He spoke with clarity that reached everyone, and I have seen his transformation into the best human being I have known in 75 years. But Diego did not change because he was forced to. He changed because he had the courage to feel in his soul every drop of pain he had caused. Don Aurelio looked at Diego with paternal love. Boy, your transformation belongs to all of us. You showed us that it is never too late for a broken heart to become a healing heart. On that sacred night in Francisco and Diego's modest home, father and son sat on the porch of their new simple house, watching the thousand lights come on throughout the community as families settled into their homes, many sleeping in their own beds for the first time in years. Diego, Francisco, broke the perfect silence. Do you know what makes me most proud? What, Dad? That when you had the opportunity to regain your life of luxury, you chose to stay here, living simply among the people we help. Diego smiled as he looked up at the stars. Dad, this is my true life of luxury, waking up surrounded by people who love me for who I am, not for my bank accounts. You don't miss anything from before. I miss ignorance. Diego laughed softly. It was easier to live without knowing how much pain there is in the world. Do you regret having learned? Never. I prefer to carry the weight of knowing than to live in blind ignorance. Francisco hugged his son tightly. Diego, do you know what your mother told me in my dreams? What did she say? That she had regained not only my son, but the best man she could ever have dreamed of. They both remained silent, feeling a warm presence enveloping them. Dad, Diego whispered, thank you for loving me enough to destroy the selfish man I was, to create the compassionate man I could be. Thank you for having the courage to be reborn when it would have been easier to remain dead inside. Under the stars that shone on New Hope, father and son understood that they had found the purest form of love, the kind that transforms pain into purpose, shame into service, and despair into miracles that change the world. The millionaire who dressed as a pauper had found his greatest treasure, a son who learned that true wealth is measured in healed hearts, dried tears, and reborn hopes. M.